Hey Reddit, when did your something's not right here gut feeling ever save you? 1. My mom dropped my 3-year-old brother off at daycare before she had to work in the morning. When she got to work, she had this terrible feeling something was wrong with him. She ended up leaving work and drove to the daycare. She found the daycare lady inside sleeping while the daycare kids, including my brother, were running around the pool. My brother never went back to the daycare again. WTF kind of daycare would even have a pool? Those things murder the shit out of little kids. 2. I had a gut feeling I should pull my wallet and phone out of my purse. Not even 20 seconds later, I get mugged. The man dragged me across the sidewalk and stole my purse, but all he ended up getting was a juice box and my birth control. 3. About 10 years ago, working security at a site about 50 miles from home, got off shift at midnight, and didn't bother to change out of uniform because I was only going to stop for gas. 2 stations in the town I was working in were open after midnight, but it slipped my mind as I drove past the first one. Pulled into the other, same brand, same gas price, same sort of dump entirely, and just didn't like something about it. Nobody else around but he clerk that I could see, but I decided to go back to the other one. Top off and headed back out of town, I get close to that station again. 3 city cop cars, 2 deputies and a state trooper are outside blocking the road with guns drawn. Turns out a city cop walked in on a robbery. Dude put a bullet in his vest, and the store owner knocked the robber out cold with a bat before the cop could recover enough to get his gun out. That would have been me, in a uniform with a nice shiny badge, but no body armor. 4. I went to hospital with shortness of breath and my heart racing. They did a chest x-ray, blood test for blood clots, ECG, and a few other tests, but all came back normal. After observing me overnight, everything still looked good. Oxygen saturation was perfect. My heart rate was still a bit elevated but nothing too crazy, and it seemed that it was likely leftover symptoms from a bad virus that I had a week or so earlier. The ER doctor asks me how I would feel if they sent me home, and I just had a bad feeling about it all. I told him as such and that I had no real basis for it except that I just felt off about it. He said fair enough, let's try one more test, and if that comes back negative then we'll send you up to general medicine and see if they can track something down. That test was a VQ scan that found, despite all other tests showing no results for blood clots, I actually had a whole bunch of them in both lungs. I ended up with a diagnosis of unprovoked bilateral pulmonary embolisms and am on blood thinners for life. Super grateful both for the bad feeling and the ER doctor who was willing to listen to it. 5. I smelled burning plastic early in the morning at my family cottage and almost went back to sleep. I was around 15, but got up to investigate. A socket on the outside of the building had caught fire and flames were shooting up the wall. The rest of my family was still sleeping and there wasn't enough smoke for the alarms to go off. I ran and got the fire extinguisher, got my dad up, and put it in his hands and pointed him towards the fire. Stopped it and called the fire department. 6. My aunt told me a story about my dad, who greatly dislikes his sister and is an all-around asshole 98% of the time, calling her out of the blue one night while she was in college. She answered. He said he didn't know why, but he had this urge to call her, to make sure she was okay. She told him she was fine and thanked him for calling to check on her. She never told anyone else except me, and hopefully a therapist or two, but she was holding the bottle of pills she was planning to commit suicide with right when he called her. 20-some years later, and she's very happy with her decision to live. 7. I was going to meet up with someone from Marketplace to buy a phone and the feeling hit me, so I called the woman and a man answered, trying to play off the fact he's a man, and I passed by where we were meeting and it was dark and I heard voices in the background on the phone call. I never stopped the car and kept going. Pretty sure I saved myself from at the very least a mugging, but learned a good lesson: always meet in a public place. 8. In 2004, on Boxing Day. Not me but my mother. Family trip including all cousins and extended family on my dad's side to visit the coastal south of Sri Lanka on vacation, about 20 people in all. Well-planned trip. Last moment my mother didn't want to go. No reason at all. None of us could get her to explain why, but she refused to go. So we went and landed on a different trip to see some other relatives. Around midday, the entire extended family now on both sides were sitting shocked in front of the television watching the very same hotel we booked being washed away live by the tsunami. Today she still can't explain what she felt. 9. Not me, but my mother, Saved my grandfather's life when he had a stroke in his chair in their living room. We had all started to walk around the development when my mother, after about 50-75 meters from the house, said, "I am going to go back and check on Dad." I went with her, and I nearly witnessed my grandfather die. He was on the chair, conscious, but unable to move or talk, just looking at my mother with bulging eyes. She called 911 once, then twice when she felt that they were running late. Ambulance came, got him on the stretcher, but it was too wide to fit out the door. We ended up tearing the door frame off to get him out. Because he was conscious, he actually remembers the ride to the hospital. He told us later that he heard the driver or someone say, "There is not a chance that this guy lives." That was when I was around 5-6 years old. He is still alive to this day, more than a decade later. At my mother's funeral, part of his speech was about how, without my mother's actions, he would not have been able to spend time with her during her final years of life. And for that, he is eternally grateful. 10. It didn't save me, but saved a friend. A big group of friends and I were walking home from an event in a town we weren't used to. It was night, and hardly anyone was around, empty streets and all that. We were walking down a sidewalk that had high fences next to it, so when you turned the corner, whatever was around it was out of sight. One of the girls fell behind, distracted by her phone, I think, and I noticed, so I started drifting behind as well to become a sort of midway point between her and the group. Soon, we were nearing where we were staying, and our group rounded a corner, then started making their way into the yard where our living quarters were. I saw a car drive past us, then turn the corner down the street the girl was still on. As soon as I saw it, I suddenly got this suspicious, awful feeling, so I stopped and went back to the corner to keep an eye on the friend. The car drove past her, stopped, did a complete U-turn, and slowly started creeping up behind alongside her. She was still on her phone and wasn't noticing a thing. I stepped out from behind the corner and started walking towards her. The car sped off quickly as soon as the driver saw me. It scares me that someone could have grabbed her, and none of us would have seen a thing. It would have just been one of those cliché movie moments where you turn around and realize a member of the group is missing. To compound the potential tragedy, she'd just gotten engaged a few weeks prior. I think the fact that we had worked with some safe houses in the area that discussed human trafficking probably aided in me being on high alert, and the area we were in was known for that sort of thing. 11. I was 15 years old and my mom dropped me off at McDonald's to get breakfast while she went across the street to get Starbucks. It was a shopping mall in suburbia and we were on the way to pick up a new kitten a few hours away. Instead of walking the 100 yards to my mom, I sat outside waiting for her to pick me up. Teenagers, I guess. As I'm standing there, a guy in an old station wagon with 2 kids in the back starts talking to me. He asks me where I'm going and I say whatever town it was. He says he's going there too with his kids and asks if I want to come. I tell him no, that my mom is across the street, and he comes closer. My gut is saying something is off, so I see a random woman walk out of Starbucks and I point to her and say that's my mom right there. He freaked out and left really quick. I still remember those 2 kids in the back seat. They looked so off. I wonder to this day if they are okay. Edit 1. I did not tell my mom and I don't know why. I think I was scared she would be upset with me and not want to go get a kitten. I was barely 15 and teenagers are selfish buttheads. I finally told her a few years ago and she was super upset about it. I was so freaked out I didn't even think to get a plate. I grew up in suburbia, but the rich kind of suburbia where this kind of stuff was never talked about. I wasn't into true crime, so I had no idea what you're supposed to do. If I had the knowledge I have now, I obviously would have handled it totally differently. 12. Not mine, but my dad's. I was downstairs helping him with some woodworking when I was 10 or 11. He went to run a 2x4 through the table saw when he noticed I was at his elbow rather than behind him. He stopped and told me to never stand behind a board when it's going through the saw in case it gets thrown. I thought he was being overly cautious and I didn't have as good of a view from behind him, but whatever, I got behind him. He flipped on the saw and ran the board through. He only got 1/3 of the way through, though, when the blade hit a nut and flung the 2x4 hard enough to crash against the wall 10 feet behind. If I hadn't moved, it would have hit me square in the chest and could have killed me. 13. I was an unpopular kid, and I always wanted to go on sleepovers, but it rarely happened. In 6th or 7th grade, I get invited to this girl's house for a birthday party. I am friendly with her but not close. I go to her house and I feel weird right away. Her mom and stepdad were sitting in the living room smoking, but being perfectly friendly. The whole night, I couldn't shake this feeling of oppressiveness, despair, and danger. I spent the evening keeping my guard up and keeping an eye out for the entire family, without any idea why. At night, the girl begs me to spend the night. Even though it hurt to say no when I could tell she was desperate, I lied and told her my parents wouldn't let me. When they said over the phone they would. A couple of months later, a student told me she had left the school and moved because her stepfather would molest her at night in her bed. I think of her often, and hope she wasn't hurt at night, and hope she's doing better, but I'm glad I got out. 14. My dad had to go to court to settle away overdue payment for the place he worked at. He was going to take me with him so I can be more exposed to the adult world, so to speak. However, that meant he would have to leave the office back door unlocked so the rest of the staff could clock in. He suddenly didn't feel right about it and decided to have me man the office instead. He got T-boned outside the courthouse on the passenger side of the car that day. The car was totaled and I would have gotten severely hurt if I was there. 15. A guy definitely roofied my drink at a bar. He was totally mild-mannered and not creepy at all. Asked me how to sign up for karaoke and pick a song. Sat beside me and talked casually. Didn't touch me once. But then he pointed to something behind my head to distract me. I looked away and looked back at him and he was looking away from me into the crowd of people. Was a very stupid way to distract someone, to point and then act like you didn't do anything as opposed to pretending to have thought you saw something. Then, I saw him screwing one of those little canisters back shut on his keychain. I asked him what he kept in there to call him out. He was cold and expressionless as he began to slowly twist it back open and said there was nothing in there. I stopped drinking my drink and he performed his song. Then I sang and he took off immediately after. It was really fucked up and I'm glad he wasn't very smooth or IDK what could have happened. What always freaked me out was how normal he seemed, before he became suddenly cold and robotic when I called him out on the canister thing. But it made me realize, of course a rapist would seem normal. That's how they get close enough to you to attack you. 16. I was president of a club, and a guy who'd recently joined just set off my alarm bells, but he never did anything wrong. I still couldn't shake the feeling he was off. I asked my best friend, a pretty burly guy, to just keep an eye on him during a conference we went to. Most of the club, minus me, went to a party. At the conference, my best friend kept an eye on the weird guy for most of the night, and ended up stopping him from raping a passed out drunk girl. I pretty much always trust my gut feelings now. 17. I was falling asleep in the car. My friend was driving. All of a sudden he stops talking and I think to myself, WTF. Something's not right. I open my eyes and turn over. Dude was having a seizure. His legs were stiff as fuck and his foot was on the gas. We were going downhill towards a busy intersection. We hit a red. So I slammed the car in park and pulled the keys out. Car starts rattling, making a weird noise, but it gained so much momentum it was still rolling down. So I grabbed the steering wheel and veered us off the road into the side of an abandoned building. I opened his door and climbed over him. I was able to get him out and turn him on his side. The police officer that showed up was like, "You couldn't have done this in a safer fashion?" I just said sorry, but inside I was like, fuck you. 18. It wasn't mine but my boss actually. It was any old day at work. It was about to be dinner rush and I was tired. As usual, I was going to go to the dollar store to get some Red Bull. I asked my manager if he wanted to split it. BC they were 2 for $5. He said no, but as soon as I reached the door he said wait. I asked him what was wrong and he said I should go later. He didn't give me a reason and we're pretty relaxed, so I told him to piss off, and as soon as I pushed the door outwards I hear a sound I can't even describe aside from just breaking. Whatever it was broken. That's all I knew. Turns out an SUV drove straight into that dollar store's front door in their Red Bull fridge. My manager has annoyed me like that a million times, but I'll never forget the time he saved my life with his BS. Lol. 19. A few years ago, when I was 19 and studying abroad in Europe, and my friend and I decided to go to Turkey. It was our first time really traveling on our own without a group, and we decided to walk around the square outside of the Blue Mosque. We felt very safe during the day and decided to see the city at night with the lights. As we were in the square, we were hounded by typical store owners trying to sell us something. Finally, most went away, and as we were going back to our hotel, a younger guy approached us. He said he had a shop on the corner, which he pointed to with lots of souvenirs including carpets. I grew up with a lot of handmade, woven carpets from my parents' travels to the Middle East and Asia. I decided it would be a nice gift, so we follow him. When we get to what we thought was his shop, we stopped. We started to walk in and he said, "Not that one, the one around the corner." We poke our head around and sure enough see a store, only selling carpets. I started to get a slightly strange feeling but nothing overwhelming, so we followed him as we could see the store. When we walked in, about 13-15 other men were in the shop. They were pointing out carpets and showing us around, and I started to get really uncomfortable. My friend seemed completely at ease, so we followed the group around the bend to the other part of the store. In Turkey, it is common to be offered tea, so that part is not particularly odd, but the men, who were now circling us, were insistent that we have tea with them in the basement. I kept saying no, but they were letting us towards steps, completely surround us. We got to the steps and my friend started walking down. My body began to sweat, my heart went crazy, and I never had such an overwhelming fear. I kept trying to think of how we could overpower these men. I grabbed my phone, stopped in my tracks, and gasped. "Friend's name, we need to go right now." My mom just texted me asking why we aren't back at the hotel yet cause the map shows we're at this store. We're supposed to FaceTime with them in 10 minutes. The men kind of look around and tell us we can have tea in less than that amount of time. I keep insisting that my parents are freaking out because they can tell we're in the carpet store and not the hotel, and that they will likely contact the embassy if we don't get going. They continued blocking the staircase. I told them that we would come for tea in the morning as I still really wanted a carpet and that we needed to get out of the store and back to FaceTime. It took a little persuading, but they eventually opened a path for us to go to the door. One of them followed us back to the square insisting that we return, come back and see them. Of course, we didn't. I have no idea if they were completely harmless or not, but I had never had such an overwhelming feeling. They easily could have drugged us, placed us in carpets, and taken us out. My parents didn't actually have our location as my phone was on airplane mode. So who actually knows? On the other hand, I might have been paranoid, but it wasn't a situation I ever wanted to be in again. Once we were back at the hotel, she told me she was really scared too, but that she thought I was fine, so she went with it. 20. My boyfriend and I were visiting friends for a week in Phoenix. We girls were lounging at the pool while the guys were flexing their grilling skills. My boyfriend paused a moment, stood very still, then told me to go get dressed. We had to go. Right now. I wanted to fuss, but something told me not to. We drove straight through to San Antonio right to his parents' very rural house. Before cell phones, and they didn't have a landline within a half-mile. Seconds before we arrived, his little sister had jumped off of a rain barrel and landed on a metal spike that went straight up through her foot and into her leg. His dad was at work, so there was no car available there. She was bleeding like crazy and his mother had just walked out and found her. I don't know what spoke to him in Phoenix, but it would have been all bad if we had not arrived exactly when we did. Edit. Adding a bit of history, and apologizing for posting this somewhere else. I'm not a Reddit pro. Circa 1983. My boyfriend and I had an apartment together. He worked, I didn't. Every day I packed a nice lunch for him and made a good dinner. One afternoon, nothing out of the ordinary, I was laying out at the complex pool and an older guy walked over to introduce himself. He wasn't hitting on me, he had just moved into town and was new to the complex. We chatted for 3 or 4 minutes when my boyfriend showed up at the pool. Odd, but okay. Introductions, then we returned to the apartment for lunch. Once behind the door of the apartment, he said to me, "Stay away from that guy. There is something very bad about him. He feels like the bottom of the deepest ocean." If you read my other post about the long sudden journey, you kinda know that he senses things. In fact, the reason he came home during his lunch was that he had a feeling which he had before I was even at the pool. He just sensed something bad and came home. After he returned to work, I was taking the kitchen trash out and the man approached me again. I'm former Army and in pretty good shape, and he's older. No place in his swimsuit for a weapon, and I could probably take him. Plus it wasn't in a secluded place. I'm not afraid. He asked me if my boyfriend was psychic. As it turns out, This guy is psychic and in fact recently transferred to San Antonio from a sister radio station to do his show there. He told me that when two psychics meet, oftentimes they feel something like cold darkness because they are receptive of vibes instead emitting like most people. In the end, he guided my boyfriend to better understand the things he sensed and they became great friends. 21. I don't know if it saved me, but years ago my so at the time had a coworker that kept inviting us out to drink. I had never met the guy and was wondering why he seemed so eager to meet me, especially since I wasn't even old enough to drink at the time. He eventually told my ex that we should come over to his place for drinks, in order for me to partake. I remember around this time creeping his FB and seeing the squirrel guy posing in front of his Honda. Something about it all made me laugh and wonder, why does this 20-something-year-old want to go to such lengths to hang out with a 17-year-old girl he knows is taken? A couple years later he is arrested on a multitude of child pornography and sexual assault charges. They seized several devices that proved he'd been doing shit with children and animals since he was at least 13. Cherry on top? Local star cop's son. 22. I normally go to the club with my husband. He was out of town but I had friends that said they'd be out. My club has always been a very safe club, but the area it's in has had its ups and downs, because drinking in a bunch of clubs in a small area comes with drunks and ne'er-do-wells of all kinds. Since I was alone I chose my parking spot carefully. The usual spot was a few blocks off and that was farther than I was comfortable. The paid parking lot was open but they crammed so many cars in that getting in and out could be difficult, and that just made me uncomfortable for some reason. I chose street parking 2 blocks down. The block itself was dark but the next block up was very brightly lit thanks to a big name hotel. Basically I had a semi-dark block, a very well-lit block, with the paid parking lot and parking lot attendants across from it, and then I was at my club. Straight shot. My car and the club was in eyesight of each other and one stood at the corner and leaned over enough. The moment I got into the club I knew something was wrong but I couldn't put my finger on it. None of my friends showed up so I'm alone. Normally this isn't an issue, but the vibe was seriously off. Without going into too long of a story with details, some dude kept trying to buy me a drink that I kept turning down, partly because I don't accept drinks from strangers and partly because this dude didn't seem to be flirting with me and so I couldn't understand why he was so insistent on getting me a drink. I lied and said I was on medication but he kept insisting so I agreed to a water, because it comes in a sealed water bottle. Dude comes back with the type of glass that mixed drinks usually come in. The moment he gives it to me he leaves and I don't see him again for the rest of the night. The water went straight down the bathroom sink and I started looking for someone to walk me out because my alarm bells are going off. Partially due to my own impatience to get myself gone and partially because the one person I knew had also disappeared, I ended up just leaving without having someone walk me. 2 blocks, straight line, mostly brightly lit. What could happen? Once again the moment I crossed the street and was walking that first block this voice in my head says you fucked up. You fucked up. Get your keys out and get ready. I'm having a full-on conversation with this inner instinct voice what of you, trying to figure out why I'm freaked out. I thought about heading back to the club and that voice said nope. It's too late. Don't run, or they'll know you know. Just keep your eyes forward and be ready to jump in your car. Don't stop for anything. I'm looking to make eye contact with the parking lot attendant but he's not there so I have no witnesses to at least watch me get to my car. Now, I'm suddenly terrified of that half a block of unlit road that I'm parked on. I almost froze at the corner but that voice said go. Hurry. Now. Crossing that road into darkness felt like jumping into the unknown. I'm freaking out and I have no idea why but now I'm picking up my pace and hoping I don't drop my keys because my hands are shaking so badly, and also, I've had nightmares like this before. For no reason. There wasn't a single thing that gave me reason to feel this panicked. Until I get to my car door. As soon as I get my door open another car pulls up from behind me and slid into the spot directly behind mine. This is weird because it's street parking, so 1. They parked sloppy with the ass end half in the street. 2. They're parked facing the wrong direction. 3. Holy shit, I don't think they're meaning to actually park. I hit the door locks and start to back up. In my review mirror I see the torso of some guy jump out and head toward my passenger door. I'm already pulling out of the parking spot but I could see his tensed up arm and closed fist just outside my passenger window. I was terrified that I hadn't given myself enough room to pull out and would have to reverse again. Had he parked any closer, I wouldn't have had enough room. At that point I was fully committed to hitting the car in front of me if I had to, because that voice was still screaming, "Don't stop. Go, go, go." And then I was gone. And that voice was gone. And I'm speeding down the highway in the most deafening silence I've ever experienced as I tried to understand what just happened. It took me a bit to put the pieces together, but I think Drink Dude was spiking drinks and Car Dude was pickup. The more I think about it, the more I get the feeling that it was a trafficking operation. If I had been 2 seconds slower for any reason, I can only imagine how that night would have ended.
Monkey.